smoothly. How do his first days in office compare to other previous administrations?
Well-oiled machine, baby. Well-oiled. You know, it's like when my wife has asked me, "Do you sure you know where we're going?" Oh, honey, I know exactly. Trust me. I think I recognize this. Look, this is what's interesting to me. A lot of the people who voted for Donald Trump want some chaos. They look at what's happened the last 15 years, where you've had incomes for the middle class flat and falling, where you've had disarray in the Middle East foreign policy. You don't see a path forward. They don't trust the institutions, including the media, the government, Congress, etc. And so I think the line is between chaos and competence. And if you can show that in the heart of this chaotic storm that you are executing plans, I think that's why this executive order story is so important. If the Trump team had rolled out that order and they had set up this extreme vetting order, and whether you hate the policy or love it, if they'd shown, look, we're going to do this policy in a reasonable way, I think that would serve them well. But the fact that they messed up the basics, these things are starting to, I think, to weigh on people. We do a podcast every day, the first 100 days. We had a great conversation on Friday with a Trump person talking about how they feel after the first month. And they said, look, we know he's kind of dumping on everything. We wanted him to dump on everything, but he's got to get stuff done.
All right, that is a good point that you make. Michael Robert.
It occurred to me earlier today as I was processing this bizarre press conference that Trump gave last week, this very incoherent and self-congratulatory sort of public telling off for the press, where it's not the first time that Trump has spoken publicly and sort of been caught in a loop of self-praise. I think that's worth mentioning. It's very strange. He seems to be having an affirmative conversation with his ego all the time. This kind of, it's almost like Tourette's. Not to denigrate anyone who has Tourette's, but it's kind of like this uncontrollable urge to self-praise, self-endorse, reaffirm his ego, even if it's not relevant to the conversation. When he had an opportunity to speak in honor of Black History Month, he sat down with Omarosa from The Apprentice and Ben Carson from The Debates, who now I think is supposed to be housing and urban development chief. His Black History speech was literally continuously cut short from him congratulating himself on his own victory. Like literally, Trump can't even talk about the weather. When he talked about the weather on Inauguration Day, he lied about the rain and then made some bizarre comment about how God wouldn't allow the rain to disrupt his sacred coronation. Like, it's very kind of trippy, sort of Renaissance era aristocracy talk. There's a lot of King's Court incoherence to all this that I think is breaking people's spirits. It passed through my mind today that Trump is some kind of a expression of nihilism. He's like a collective suicide attempt. I mean, what people don't think about is that Trump's global popularity on the right is as significant as Obama's was sort of in the center left, in terms of, social democrats supporting Obama the world over. And he did have a wider appeal than Trump. But that's because, center left Democrats are usually going to have a more genuine attachment that translates more easily internationally. But yeah, every right winger that is trying to sort of ride a wave of nationalist anti-Semitism, well, partially anti-Semitism, sort of this nativist pessimism, this xenophobia infused, highly inflammatory, deeply paranoid platform to success from your Geert Wilders or Geert Wilders, however you pronounce that name, to Marine Le Pen in France and, not Theresa May. Theresa May is in England is not the person that I saw leading Brexit. It's fascinating to sort of watch a version of Hillary Clinton be sort of considered conservative in our country, because Theresa May is like mawkish and awkward and corporatist in a way that Hillary Clinton was. Hillary was certainly, to any reasonable person, a center-right candidate like Theresa May. Excuse me, and she is one of these sort of corporatist technocrats, very sort of poor people skills. So, what does Trump mean? Is Trump the panic button, or is he the self-destruct? Because I thought he was the panic button when he first took power. I thought it was kind of a cry for help from his voters, to kind of, recognize us. Sort of, in the white working class grievance. Aside from the identity stuff, this kind of, can you restore the social fabric of our community and trade deals and stuff like that. But I've in fact become more cynical on the idea of what Trump means. I think Trump is not an expression of cynicism or anxiety. I feel like Trump is an expression of nihilism and sort of a resignation, a kind of depressive's response to death. This kind of, I'm going to die anyway. It's interesting that people sort of vilify almost kind of project the sentiment of Trumpers onto anti-fascists, this kind of the media narrative that anti-fascists just kind of want to burn it all down. Well, what did Trump voters, not just sort of arbitrary Trump voters, but Trump voters who voted their ideology, for whom Trump is some kind of a expression of right-wing utopianism. Trump was a conservative expression of black bloc sentiment. Trump was sent to break windows and burn houses down. The media is going to have you worry about a couple of people at Berkeley breaking windows at Starbucks, while Trump is dismantling the EPA, dismantling the Department of Education. What's the real story here? Who really is the vandal? Do we just excuse the state? Like, it's so fascinating to me. Right-wingers avoid criticism by committing their crimes behind the veil of authority, of because they, and usually they steal power or they manufacture. You know, there's a lot of evidence that, that Trump has been installed into office more so than elected, but we'll put that aside for the moment. My concern is that if you really are upset about a violent, destructive force destroying American society, you need to look past this kind of narrative that I've noticed of, everything's fine as long as no one engages in violence. Even when I've sort of pointed out white nationalists like Richard Spencer, people are like, well, is he using violence? Well, right-wingers don't use violence until they get the levers of power. That's why they aren't like usually vandals or, engaging in petty crime, is because when right-wingers take power, their crimes are legal. They legalize their crimes before they legalize their atrocities and misdeeds before they engage in them. That's the whole thing. That's the Bush thing. That's every Nixon, Reagan, right back to the European fascists of the Second World War. Everything done by Mussolini and Adolf Hitler and any of those groups, Pinochet in Chile, it's all done using state power. And that's way worse than a few windows getting smashed and a few cars getting burned. Hundreds of thousands of people being slaughtered in Iraq. It's millions of people being killed during the Holocaust. But whatever, right? Because it has the legitimacy of state power. Right-wingers do their killing through militarized police forces. Somehow people think that gives them moral high ground over people who bust up mailboxes with baseball bats. If there's one thing I've learned studying politics, is that pacifism is not an absolute good. Just because you're advocating for something peacefully doesn't mean that what you're advocating for is good.